An African-American man adopted a baby girl with Down syndrome. But many years later, he did something wrong to his adopted daughter. "No one will want to adopt a special child," murmured Director Phoebe, her voice low as she watched Kathy, a 5-year-old with Down syndrome, sitting alone in the orphanage courtyard. Kathy hummed softly, entirely absorbed in coloring her drawing, blissfully unaware of the pitying glances cast her way. At that moment, a middle-aged African-American man stepped through the orphanage gates. Jack Holmes, a retired university professor, had come seeking to fill the emptiness of his solitary life. Director Phoebe greeted him with a strained smile, already preparing to steer him toward what she considered better options. "We have very bright children here," she began, gently attempting to guide him away from the courtyard. But Jack halted when his eyes landed on Kathy. She had looked up from her drawing and, for the first time in months, smiled at a stranger. "Who is she?" Jack asked, moving closer to the little girl. The director tried to block his path. "Oh, no," she said quickly. "She's a special case. She requires too much care, medications, therapies. A single man like yourself wouldn't manage." But something in Kathy's eyes had already struck a chord deep within Jack's heart. Ignoring the director, he knelt beside Kathy. The little girl held up her drawing, a family, complete with a mother and child, but a blank space where the father should have been. "People like her," Director Phoebe started again, her tone patronizing. "People like her," Jack interrupted, his voice steady. "Or people like me?" He fixed her with a piercing look. "I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do because of the color of my skin." The director fell silent, clearly taken aback by her own insensitivity. Neither of them could have foreseen the extraordinary story that was about to unfold. No one could have imagined that this little girl, whom so many had underestimated, would one day profoundly touch the lives of countless people. Nor could they have guessed that her love would transform not only Jack's life, but also the lives of all those who had once doubted her worth. "Would you like a dad?" Jack asked Kathy gently, offering her a crayon to complete her drawing. They didn't know it then, but that simple gesture marked the beginning of a journey that would shatter stereotypes and reshape their lives forever. New Mexico. Several years earlier, in a quiet neighborhood of New Mexico, Kathy was a joyful 5-year-old who spent her days playing with a rag doll in the yard while her mother cooked dinner. The aroma of simmering beans drifted through the air, and every so often her mother would peek out of the kitchen window to watch her daughter's radiant smile. Then everything changed in an instant. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the peace of their home. Her mother dropped what she was doing and ran outside in a panic, while her father rushed to secure the back door. "Kathy, my darling," her mother cried, shielding her with her body. The shots grew louder, closer, until they seemed to echo right outside their walls. And then, abruptly, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to stretch on forever. Kathy remained motionless, nestled beneath her mother, who no longer moved. Her small hands clutched tightly at the floral dress her mother had worn, the same one they had picked out together at the market. Nearby, her father lay lifeless by the door. Hours passed before Doña Carmen, their kindly neighbor who often gave Kathy sweets, ventured over and found her. The little girl was still by her mother's side, softly singing a lullaby as though hoping to wake her. The neighbors who gathered whispered among themselves, their faces heavy with grief. Violence had ravaged their town, and yet, in the midst of it all, Kathy's small, fragile voice rose. A child clinging to a fleeting sense of safety in a world that had taken so much from her. What will happen now with the little girl? Everyone in the village whispered the same question, their hearts heavy with worry. Kathy was cradled in Mrs. Carman's arms, tears streaming down the older woman's weathered face. The sweet child, with her cherubic face and innocent eyes, clung to her without understanding why her parents wouldn't wake up. That night, as Mrs. Carman tucked Kathy into bed in her modest home, the entire community wrestled with a question that weighed like a stone. Who would care for this special child, now orphaned, in a village where no one was truly safe? Violence had plagued their town, forcing many businesses to close. Mrs. Carman's little shop barely earned enough to keep her fed. At night, she would hold Kathy close as the child woke up crying, calling for her parents. "Everything will be all right, my sweet girl," she would whisper, though deep down she knew it was a lie. With each passing day, finding food became harder, and the medicine Kathy needed was nearly impossible to obtain. Yet, Kathy's radiant smiles and her drawings, sketched with the few pencils left in the shop, brought light to Mrs. Carman's bleak days. One afternoon, while they were buying what little they could afford at the market, gunfire broke out again. Mrs. Carman pulled Kathy behind a fruit stand, her heart pounding as she was reminded of how the child had lost her parents. When the chaos subsided, she looked into Kathy's wide, terrified eyes and made a decision. That evening, as she watched the child sleeping peacefully, she whispered with trembling lips, "I can't protect you the way you deserve, my angel." Her hands shook as she dialed the number a neighbor had given her for social services. The choice shattered her heart, but she knew it was the only chance Kathy had to survive. On their last night together, Mrs. Carman packed the girl's few clothes and her beloved rag doll, tears falling freely. "You're going to find a family that will give you all the love you deserve, my special little one," she promised through her sobs. Kathy, sensing something was amiss, wrapped her tiny arms around Mrs. Carman in an embrace that felt like goodbye. Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the car from social services that would take Kathy to a city orphanage. As the child departed, she handed Mrs. Carman a drawing. Two figures holding hands under a bright sun. The orphanage, Our Lady of Hope, loomed grey and unwelcoming. Its director, Mrs. Phoebe, barely concealed her distaste as she reviewed Kathy's file. "A child with Down syndrome," she muttered under her breath. "Finding a family for her will be next to impossible." Kathy's first days there were nothing short of miserable. Other children mocked her speech, hid her rag doll, and excluded her from their games. She ate her meals alone in the far corner of the dining hall, while Mrs. Phoebe pretended not to notice. The director was far too preoccupied with impressing prospective adoptive parents to care about the lonely child. A young social worker, Rosa, showed Kathy rare kindness. She discovered the girl's extraordinary talent for drawing and gifted her a notebook and colored pencils. "You have a beautiful gift," Rosa would tell her, as Kathy filled page after page with pictures of happy families. Yet, every time potential parents visited, Mrs. Phoebe sent Kathy to the kitchen. "It's better not to complicate things," she'd say, feigning concern. From the kitchen window, Kathy watched other children leave with their new families, their faces glowing with joy. One evening she asked Rosa, "Why doesn't anyone want me?" Rosa held her tightly, struggling to find words that could explain the world's cruelty. "Your special family will come," Rosa reassured her, though with each passing day the promise seemed less certain. Months turned into a year, and Kathy's notebook filled with drawings of families that existed only in her imagination. Her rag doll, her constant companion, grew more tattered with time. The arrival of Jack Holmes caused quite a stir at the orphanage. It wasn't every day that a solitary, impeccably dressed African-American man expressed interest in adopting. Mrs. Phoebe greeted him with a forced smile, steering him toward the children she deemed most suitable. That afternoon, Kathy sat under a tree in the garden, sketching quietly. Through the window, Jack noticed her. Something about the child's quiet solitude mirrored his own. He approached her cautiously, drawn in by the colorful drawings scattered around her. As he knelt beside her, Kathy looked up, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, Jack saw more than a child. He saw resilience, a kind of hope that shone even in the face of heartbreak. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Kathy's future seemed to hold a glimmer of promise. "May I sit with you?" Kathy asked softly, her voice as gentle as a breeze. To everyone's surprise, Kathy, typically shy around strangers, looked up with a smile and turned her sketchbook toward Jack Holmes. "This is my family," she said, pointing to a drawing. "But I don't know them yet." When Jack requested Kathy's file, Phoebe, the director of the orphanage, tried to steer him away. "We have other children. More. Typical," she suggested delicately. "This little girl has special needs. Down syndrome. She requires constant attention, medications. A single man could never manage that." "I know what it's like to be looked at differently," Jack interrupted, recalling his own challenges as an African-American professor in the 1980s. Rosa, an empathetic caretaker who often observed from the sidelines, noticed the way Jack's eyes lit up as he examined Kathy's drawings. From that moment on, during each visit, Jack brought along illustrated books and read with her. Kathy's curiosity blossomed in their time together, astonishing him with her questions. "Why's the sky blue? Why do leaves change color?" she would ask, her bright eyes wide with wonder. "This child deserves a chance," Jack told Rosa one afternoon, "and I need a reason to believe in kindness again." His voice carried a sincerity that resonated with Rosa, a shared understanding between two lonely souls on the brink of transforming each other's lives. The road to adoption, however, was far from smooth. Phoebe erected barriers at every turn. A single African-American man adopting a child with Down syndrome. "What will the adoption committee say?" she muttered behind closed doors. Jack faced an avalanche of psychological evaluations and relentless scrutiny from social workers, all questioning his ability to meet Kathy's unique needs. But Jack refused to falter. He submitted glowing letters of recommendation from his university, highlighting his dedication to teaching and his financial stability. He even took courses in special education. Rosa became his unwavering advocate. "I've seen how Kathy's face lights up when she's with him," she passionately argued in committee meetings. "She's never smiled like that before." During supervised visits, Jack and Kathy built a bond that grew stronger with every passing day. He taught her to write her name, while she shared her techniques for mixing colors in her artwork. "When you come home with me," Jack said gently, "you'll have a whole room full of paints and crayons." One quiet afternoon, as they sketched together, Kathy looked up and asked, "Are you going to be my real dad?" Her words struck Jack to his core. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he replied, "If you'll let me, I'll be the proudest dad in the world." After 3 grueling months of legal battles, Jack finally received approval. Phoebe begrudgingly signed the papers, her disapproval evident in every stroke of the pen. On the day Jack arrived to take Kathy home, she ran into his arms, clutching her rag doll and sketchbook, her most treasured belongings. Rosa watched them leave with tears of joy, while Phoebe muttered predictions of failure from her office window, predictions that would never come to pass. Jack's apartment in Boston was modest, but warm. Kathy gasped in delight when she saw her new room. The walls were painted in soft, cheerful colors, and an easel stood waiting in the corner, stocked with art supplies. "This is your space to create," Jack said with a smile. Their joy was short-lived. When Jack tried to enroll Kathy in the neighborhood school, the principal, Jennifer Parker, greeted them with barely concealed skepticism. "We have an excellent special education school just 20 minutes away," she suggested, sliding a brochure across her desk. Jack, calm but resolute, pushed back. "My daughter deserves the chance to attend a regular school," he said, presenting documents that demonstrated Kathy's capabilities. Sitting beside him, Kathy clutched her rag doll tightly, her small hands trembling with nerves. Amidst the resistance, one voice stood out. Miss Thompson, a young third-grade teacher, expressed genuine interest in Kathy. During an evaluation, she watched in awe as Kathy solved basic math problems with remarkable ease. "She has such a unique way of understanding numbers," Miss Thompson said, her enthusiasm evident. But this was only the beginning of their challenges. Jack and Kathy's journey would test the strength of their bond and their resolve, but they were determined to face whatever lay ahead, together. That same afternoon, several parents gathered in the principal's office. "How will this affect our children's learning?" Mrs. Williams, Victoria's mother, inquired. Victoria, after all, was one of the most popular girls in the class. At home, as Jack prepared dinner, he overheard Kathy singing softly while she sketched at the table. He paused, watching her. His little girl, so unique and gifted, was about to face a world that often failed to see beyond the surface. "We'll show them how wrong they are," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The first day of school proved more challenging than Jack had imagined. Victoria Williams and her clique began their campaign with subtle glances and stifled giggles. During recess, no one invited Kathy to play. Instead, she sat alone on a bench, pulling out her notebook to draw, a familiar refuge when sadness crept in. Ms. Thompson, her teacher, tried to involve her in the classroom. "Kathy, would you like to read the next paragraph?" she asked kindly. Snickers erupted when Kathy read slower than the others, but Miss Thompson was struck by something extraordinary: Kathy's uncanny ability to recall every detail of the story. The first major incident happened during lunch. Victoria accidentally spilled her juice on Kathy's drawings. "Oops, sorry," she said with feigned innocence. "Maybe now they'll look better." Her friends laughed as Kathy desperately tried to save her soaked sketches. At home, Jack noticed something had changed. Kathy no longer sang while she drew, and her once vivid artwork now featured darker hues. One evening he found her crying in the bathroom, staring at her reflection and touching her face repeatedly. "Why can't I be like the other girls, Daddy?" she sobbed. Ms. Thompson called Jack shortly after to share something important. Kathy had an extraordinary memory and a rare ability to detect lies. Just yesterday, during a conflict in class, she had been the only one to recount exactly what had happened. Yet the bullying continued. Cruel notes found their way into Kathy's locker. Stupid, weird, go to a special school. Jack kept every note, documenting the harassment even as his heart broke to see his little girl suffer. The day Frank arrived at school, everything began to shift. A new student from Italy, his endearing accent quickly won over the class. Victoria wasted no time trying to grab his attention, but lunchtime brought an unexpected turn. As Victoria and her friends dumped Kathy's books onto the library floor, Frank appeared. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size?" he challenged them, gathering Kathy's books and sitting beside her. Kathy stared at him, surprised. "These are my dad's law books," Frank explained as they organized the pile. Kathy picked one up and began reciting paragraphs from memory. Frank's eyes widened. "You have an incredible memory," he said. From that day forward, the two became inseparable. They ate lunch together, with Frank teaching Kathy Italian phrases while she helped him with math. "Sei special," he would say. "It means you're special in the best way." For moments, Kathy smiled, forgetting the taunts of others. Furious that the new boy preferred spending time with Kathy, Victoria escalated her cruelty. "Did you know her dad isn't even her real dad?" she whispered in the hallways. "He adopted her out of pity." But Frank wasn't swayed. He saw in Kathy what others missed, a brilliant mind caught in a world blinded by prejudice. During a group project, while Kathy explained a complex problem, Frank watched her with admiration. "One day," he whispered, "everyone will see what I see." When the class presented projects, Kathy unveiled something entirely unexpected, a presentation on injustices within the school system. Her peers were speechless as she spoke with remarkable clarity about bullying and discrimination. Among the guest judges sat Frank's father, a Roman judge. Initially skeptical, his demeanor shifted as Kathy began citing legal cases she had memorized from his books. "Extraordinary," he murmured, jotting notes. After the presentation, Ms. Thompson approached Jack with a look of quiet awe. Kathy far exceeded the expectations for her grade level. "We should consider moving her ahead," the teacher suggested during a parent-teacher meeting. Jack Holmes, her father, felt a swell of pride tempered by a gnawing unease. His daughter was proving her exceptional abilities, but at what personal cost? That evening, as Jack sifted through Kathy's backpack to sign some school forms, his hand brushed against something unusual. A folded note peeked out, and what he read sent an icy chill down his spine. The message was scrawled in sharp, accusatory letters. "Tell your friend Frank to watch himself. Hanging out with the slow ones can rub off." The handwriting was unmistakably Victoria's, one of Kathy's more vocal tormentors. Meanwhile, the school's visiting judge, impressed by Kathy's sharp intellect and moral compass, had begun sending home additional legal books through his son, Frank. "It's like she has a sixth sense for injustice," Frank remarked to his father one afternoon. "She sees the flaws and truths others overlook." But as Kathy's gifts blossomed, the harassment escalated. What started as whispers and eye rolls from Victoria and her clique had now transformed into a targeted campaign of intimidation. Jack carefully filed away every cruel note, every piece of evidence, even as he watched his daughter's bond with Frank deepen. Their shared curiosity for ethics and justice forged a strong connection, giving Jack both hope and concern. From the kitchen, Jack observed the two of them one evening. Kathy and Frank sat at the dining table, their heads bent close over a textbook. Their laughter carried softly through the house. Jack's heart skipped when he noticed Frank's hand brush against Kathy's as he turned a page. Later, while preparing dinner, Jack overheard them laughing again. Peering into the living room, he froze. Frank was holding Kathy's hand, explaining a math problem, his voice calm and steady. The expression on Kathy's face was something Jack had never seen before, an unguarded tenderness. The spell broke with Jack's sharp voice. "That's enough. No more visits," he said as he entered the room abruptly. Kathy's eyes widened. "Dad, it's just math," she protested. Jack's tone was unyielding. "Kathy, you're too young for this kind of thing." "Frank, I think it's time for you to leave." Frank began to explain, but Jack cut him off. "Now," he said firmly. For the first time in her life, Kathy stood up to her father. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "Do you think I don't deserve kindness? That no one could care about me without ulterior motives?" The words struck Jack like a physical blow. In Kathy's tear-filled eyes, he saw his younger self, a man who had once been abandoned by his wife because she couldn't bear the social prejudice against their interracial marriage. That night, Kathy sobbed behind her bedroom door while Jack sat alone in the living room, clutching his chest. His blood pressure had spiked dangerously high, yet he refused to lie down. Instead, he stared at the darkened ceiling, haunted by self-doubt. Was he protecting his daughter, or was he forcing his own fears upon her? Everything shifted during the school's mock trial competition. Kathy was assigned to defend a student falsely accused of cheating, while Victoria, relishing her role as prosecutor, confidently prepared to claim victory. When Kathy rose to give her defense, the entire auditorium fell silent. Her voice was clear, steady, and commanding. She cited relevant legal precedents with precision, dismantled false testimonies with ease, and introduced overlooked evidence that turned the case on its head. Victoria's smug confidence crumbled as Kathy exposed inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. "My client deserves justice," Kathy concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "We all deserve to be judged by our actions, not by the labels others impose on us." The audience was spellbound. Not a sound stirred as Kathy returned to her seat, her poise unshaken. Afterward, the visiting judge, who had been watching the proceedings, approached Jack. "Your daughter has an extraordinary gift for law," he said, his tone one of genuine admiration. "You should consider enrolling her in the special pre-law program." As Jack watched Kathy, now surrounded by classmates who looked at her with newfound respect, he felt both pride and humility. Kathy wasn't just his daughter, she was a force for justice, a light in a world often clouded by prejudice and misunderstanding. And for the first time, he wondered if it was time to let her shine on her own terms. The program director, upon hearing about the situation, expressed skepticism. The program was known for its rigorous standards. Someone in her condition might not be suitable. That's when Ms. Thompson stepped in. "Kathy has been instrumental in resolving conflicts among students," she asserted firmly. Ms. Thompson presented records of Kathy's successful mediations, showcasing her unique ability to discern truth and bring people together. The evidence silenced the room. However, Victoria, humiliated by her defeat, stormed out of the auditorium. Her father, a prominent attorney, was waiting outside. "I can't believe that special girl bested you," he sneered with disdain. Meanwhile, Jack Holmes was cleaning out the attic when he stumbled across a collection of letters. They were tucked away inside Kathy's old math notebook, hidden notes exchanged between her and Frank. The letters were filled with dreams of a shared future, of going to college together. Fear gripped Jack as he read their plans. That night, when Frank arrived to study, Jack erupted. "Do you think this is some kind of joke?" Jack's voice was sharp, his anger cutting through the room. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be judged by society, to be condemned without being known?" "Sir, I would never hurt Kathy," Frank replied earnestly, but Jack was too consumed by his memories to hear him. Ghosts of his past clouded his judgment, his wife, packing her bags, unable to bear the whispers, the stares, the rejection from her family for marrying a black man. "You say that now," Jack continued, his voice breaking. "But what about when the pressure becomes unbearable? When your friends mock you, or your family feels ashamed? Will you still stand by her?" Frank fell silent for a moment. Then, with tears streaming down his face, he revealed something he had never shared before. I have dyslexia. My whole life, people have called me stupid, slow, different. Kathy is the only one who has ever helped me without judgment. She sees beyond my struggles, just as I see beyond hers. The honesty in Frank's words struck Jack like a blow. For a moment he glimpsed the same determination in the boy's eyes that he himself once had, fighting for acceptance in college. But fear proved stronger than reason. In the days that followed, the tension in the household was palpable. Kathy barely spoke during meals, and her grades began to slip. Her once vibrant drawings were now dark and somber. During a critical presentation on civil rights, she saw Frank sitting in the audience. Her hands began to tremble, her words faltering. From the front row, Victoria smirked, her voice dripping with malice. "Looks like even talking takes special help," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. That evening, while cleaning her room, Kathy discovered an old box of photographs. In one, a younger Jack smiled beside a beautiful woman. Behind the photo was a note. "I can't take the stairs anymore," the comments. "I'm sorry." The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's. The discovery hit Kathy hard. Her father wasn't a tyrant. He was a man haunted by old wounds. At dinner, she noticed Jack rubbing his chest, his expression pained. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, her concern evident. "Just tired, sweetheart," he replied with a forced smile. But Kathy had inherited her father's knack for spotting untruths. That night, she heard Jack coughing in his room. When she went to check on him, she found unopened bottles of medication on his nightstand. Jack had been so consumed with protecting her that he had neglected his own health. Meanwhile, the harassment against Frank escalated. One morning he found his locker defaced with hateful slurs. "Traitor," boyfriend of the slow girl. During gym class, a group of boys cornered him in the locker room. "My dad says yours is ashamed of you," sneered Victoria's brother, a judge's son. "Imagine a respected man like him having a son hanging around with deficients." The punches came without warning. Frank fought back, but he was outnumbered. The incident spread like wildfire through the school. Frank was suspended for fighting, his bruises a silent testament to the cruelty he endured. Victoria, triumphant, smiled as her father, a partner at the city's most prestigious law firm, met with Judge Roman in his office. "Your son has a promising future," Victoria's father said with a calculated smile. "It would be a shame if his internship application were tarnished by bad associations." In Italy, they have some of the finest law schools, don't you think? Kathy, hidden behind a column, overheard every word. Her heart sank as she listened to Judge Jack Holmes sigh in defeat. "Perhaps it's better for Frank to finish his studies in Rome," Jack murmured. "I've already made the arrangements." At home, Frank confronted his father, frustration evident in his voice. "You can't win this way. It's not right." But for the first time, Jack seemed to have lost his faith in justice. "Sometimes, son," he said, his tone heavy with resignation, "sacrifices must be made for the future." The parents' meeting was a battleground of clashing opinions. Jack passionately defended Kathy's right to advanced classes, while other parents loudly protested. "She's holding the group back," one argued. Amid the chaos, it happened. Jack clutched his chest, his words faltering as his knees gave way. He collapsed before anyone could reach him. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but for Kathy, waiting outside the hospital, those minutes stretched into an eternity. The doctors were blunt. His heart was failing, and urgent care was critical. That evening, as Kathy searched through the house, she discovered drawers filled with untouched medications. Her father had been so focused on fighting for her that he had neglected his own health. Meanwhile, Frank prepared to leave for Italy. He couldn't face Kathy directly and left behind a letter he would never deliver. "Forgive me for not being stronger," it read. At the hospital, Victoria's father appeared with a polished, insincere offer. "I have connections at an excellent special school," he said with a thin smile. "Everyone wins. The school gets a boost in its inclusion image, and your daughter ends up where she belongs." Rosa, an old social worker, rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news. She found Kathy asleep in the waiting room, clutching her worn-out rag doll, the one she had brought from the orphanage. In her small hands was a new drawing, herself and her father, surrounded by dark shadows. 5 years later, Harvard Law School's graduation ceremony sparkled under the spring sun. Kathy, wearing her cap and gown, stood ready to deliver the valedictorian speech. Among the audience, Victoria and other former classmates, now mediocre law students, watched with envy. The girl they had once humiliated had surpassed them in every way. "When they told me someone like me didn't belong here," Kathy began, her voice steady and clear, "all they did was give me more reasons to prove them wrong." Her words reverberated through the auditorium, commanding the attention of every listener. In the front row, Jack Holmes fought to hold back tears. His hair, now completely silver, bore the weight of the years. Meanwhile, Frank, who had quietly returned from Italy, watched Kathy with a mix of pride and regret, recalling their shared moments in the library when they had once studied side by side. "Success," Kathy continued, "is not measured by how many obstacles you avoid, but by how many barriers you tear down along the way." Her words struck a chord, leaving those who had doubted her shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Kathy soon became the rising star at Williamson Associates, a prestigious law firm. She earned a reputation for taking on and winning cases others deemed impossible. Irony wove its thread as several of her former bullies now worked under her leadership. Victoria, who had secured her position at the firm through her father's influence, now prepared cases for Kathy. "I need these documents by tomorrow," Kathy instructed curtly, without sparing her a glance, the memory of past humiliations fresh in her mind. During an important presentation, Victoria made a critical error in the case dates. Kathy showed no leniency. "So, you didn't check the original documents?" she questioned Victoria in front of the team. "I suppose some people really do need special education to get their work done properly." Kathy's professional success grew exponentially, but something within her had hardened. Calls to Jack became shorter, less frequent. "I'm busy, Dad," she would say, brushing off his concerns. Visits dwindled to quick lunches filled with little conversation. Locked in the bottom drawer of her desk was a drawing she and her father had once created together. Late at night, when the office was silent, she would occasionally take it out, staring at it in quiet reflection. "You've changed," her assistant remarked one day, unaware of Kathy's past. "You're brilliant, but honestly, you can be intimidating." Kathy's smile was devoid of warmth. "The world changed me," she replied. "I just learned how to play its game." In his modest apartment, Jack struggled silently with his illness. Unused pills piled up in the bathroom. The doctors stressed the urgency of a kidney transplant, but Jack refused to burden Kathy with his troubles. Late at night, as the city hummed in the background, Jack would sit alone, gazing at old photographs of Kathy as a child, her face bright with dreams. "You've come so far, my girl," he would whisper, his voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. Rosa, who had always kept in touch with them, stumbled upon Jack Holmes collapsed on the kitchen floor one afternoon. "You have to tell her," she pleaded as they waited for the results at the hospital. "She has a right to know." At her law firm, Kathy was celebrating a monumental victory. She had just won a landmark case defending the rights of people with disabilities. The irony was sharp and bitter. As she raised her glass to toast with her colleagues, her assistant approached nervously. "Your father has been calling all day," he informed her. "He says it's urgent." "I'll call him tomorrow," Kathy replied, lifting her champagne flute. "Tonight, we're celebrating." Yet, deep inside, a twinge of unease stirred. That night, Jack sat in his favorite armchair, surrounded by photos of Kathy. Pictures of her academic achievements, her awards, her celebrated legal victories. In his lap lay an old sketchbook she had left behind years ago. Tears fell freely onto the faded pages. The ache in his chest became unbearable. As consciousness slipped away, his final thoughts were of his daughter. Had he done the right thing by keeping his suffering hidden for so long? Frank, now a respected judge in the juvenile court, heard about Jack's condition from his father. "He's in bad shape, son," his father said gravely, "and she doesn't even know." The news hit Frank like a gut punch. He tried reaching out to Kathy several times, but she dodged his calls. Fate, however, had other plans. An important case landed in his courtroom, a discrimination suit involving a private school. To everyone's surprise, the defense attorney was none other than Kathy. Their reunion in the courtroom was icy and formal. "Your Honor," she said without emotion. But Frank noticed her hands tremble slightly as she held her documents. She still wore the hairpin he had given her years ago. During the recess, Frank tried to talk to her about Jack. "Don't mix personal matters with professional ones," she cut him off sharply. But her eyes betrayed her, revealing the pain she tried so hard to mask. That evening, while tidying her office, Kathy came across a box Rosa had left for her. Inside were dozens of letters Frank had sent over the years, carefully preserved by Jack, along with his untouched medications and a personal journal. "My dearest daughter," she read on one of the pages, her vision blurred by tears. "Every day I see you succeed makes all the pain worth it. Forgive me for not telling you how sick I am. I never wanted to be an obstacle in your path." The call came at midnight. "Your father is in critical condition," Rosa said. "He urgently needs a kidney transplant." Kathy dropped the phone. The scattered letters from Frank still spread across her desk. At the hospital, the harsh reality struck her like a blow. Jack, her strong and resilient father, lay connected to machines, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen him. The doctors were blunt. He had been refusing treatment for years to avoid disrupting his daughter's career. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, holding his hand tightly. Among Jack's belongings, Kathy found a worn journal. Page after page contained letters he had never sent. "My dear Kathy," one entry read, her tears falling freely now. "Today you won another case. I saw you on the news. I wish I could tell you how much I regret separating you from Frank, how I let my fears destroy your happiness. He truly loved you, just as I once loved someone deeply." Kathy arrived with more revelations. Jack had been quietly supporting families with children who had special needs, using his savings to cover therapy costs. He had even helped Victoria when her father abandoned her, a secret he had kept from Stern all along. In the hospital waiting room, Stern broke down completely. The formidable and successful attorney vanished, leaving behind only a daughter facing the possible loss of the only father who had ever truly loved her. For days, Kathy didn't leave the hospital. Immersed in medical files and test results, she uncovered the full extent of her father's sacrifices. He had been ill since his college years, but had hidden every symptom, every crisis, every night of pain. "I would rather have died than distract you from your studies," Rosa explained, showing Kathy a collection of letters Jack had kept. In them, he had proudly chronicled every one of her accomplishments, even as his health silently declined. One afternoon, Victoria arrived, unrecognizable without her usual air of superiority. "Your father saved me," she confessed tearfully. "When Dad left us and Mum fell into depression, he paid for my therapy. I never told you because I was ashamed. Ashamed of how much I hurt you." That evening, while reading more letters from Frank that had been found at Jack's house, Kathy made another discovery. Her father had tried multiple times to reach out to Frank, expressing regret. "Your daughter deserves happiness," he had written in one unsent letter, "and I was a fool not to see that you were her joy." The doctors were clear. Jack urgently needed a kidney transplant. "It's risky, given your condition," they warned Kathy when she volunteered as a donor. "I don't care," she replied with the same fierce resolve she had inherited from her father. "He risked everything for me." Alone in the hospital chapel, Kathy picked up a pencil for the first time in years, sketching a portrait of herself and her father like they used to do together. Beneath it, she wrote, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Her decision to donate her kidney sent ripples through the hospital. "It's too dangerous," the doctors insisted. "Your Down syndrome complicates the surgery." But Kathy, wielding her legal expertise, fought for her right to save her father. If the roles were reversed, no one would question his decision, she argued in a meeting with the medical board. "My condition doesn't diminish my capacity to love or my willingness to sacrifice for someone I love." Her words silenced every objection. The night before the surgery, as the nurses prepared Jack for the operation, Kathy made another decision. She called Victoria into her hospital room. "I want you to take over the Johnson case," she said, handing her a folder. "It's the firm's most important case, and I know you'll handle it well." Victoria looked at her in astonishment. "But me, after everything I've done to you?" Kathy gave her a gentle smile. "My father taught me that holding on to resentment only poisons the heart. He gave you a second chance. Now I'm doing the same." Rosa organized a prayer chain at the old orphanage. The director, Phoebe, now elderly, joined silently, perhaps recalling the biases she had held years ago. In the chapel, children with diverse abilities prayed for the girl who had once lived there. "I'm scared," Kathy admitted to her father that last night. Jack, frail but alert, held her hand tightly. "I was scared too," he whispered. "Scared I wouldn't be enough of a father for you. But you taught me that love is stronger than fear." The surgery was a success, though the recovery was slow. In their shared hospital room, father and daughter healed, not just their bodies, but their hearts as well. During the long hours of recovery, Jack retrieved a worn box from beneath his bed. "I kept every drawing you ever made," he said, showing her childhood artwork she had long forgotten. One drawing stood out: a tall black man and a little girl with Down syndrome, hand in hand under a rainbow. Jack's voice trembled as he finally spoke the words that had lingered in silence for years. "I was so afraid of losing you, Kathy, the way I lost Marie," he confessed, his voice heavy with regret. For the first time he mentioned his ex-wife's name. "When she left, broken by prejudice, I swore no one would ever hurt you like that. But I was wrong. I hurt you myself." Kathy, her left hand still weak from surgery, reached for a pencil with determined fragility. "Let's draw again." Like we used to, Daddy, she suggested softly. Together, they sketched a new portrait, not perfect, not steady, but rich with love and redemption. This time their creation included one more figure. Frank, Jack murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He never stopped asking about you. Every Christmas, every birthday, Rosa would bring me his messages. But my fear outweighed my reason. Between faint laughter and tearful pauses, they reminisce about forgotten moments, their impromptu art lessons, long nights poring over law books, and the small victories that shaped Kathy into who she was today. Defying the doctor's orders, Jack insisted on taking a trip. With Rosa's help, he hired a cab to the courthouse where Frank now worked. Walking gingerly with his cane, he clutched a worn folder in his hand. "Judge Holmes?" Jack called out when he found him. "I need to show you something." He opened the folder on Frank's desk, revealing years of sketches Kathy had drawn of him, Frank reading, Frank smiling, Frank standing tall to protect her from bullies. Each stroke of the pencil told a story of unwavering affection, untouched by the passage of time. Frank's voice cracked as he admitted, "I never started a family. Every case I took on against discrimination, I thought of her. Every ruling I wrote carried her spirit of justice." Victoria, who now devoted her career to pro bono cases, joined their efforts at reconciliation. "I found every article where Frank cited your cases, Kathy," she revealed. "He never mentioned your name, but he always highlighted your arguments." Rosa arrived with a surprise album filled with newspaper clippings of Kathy's accomplishments and notes detailing Frank's rulings that set new legal precedents based on her work. "You two never stopped working together," Rosa said with a knowing smile, "even if you didn't realize it." Jack, weary but resolute, locked eyes with Frank. "I made a terrible mistake separating you. Now, before it's too late, I want to make it right." The old art studio in Jack's home had remained untouched, like a relic frozen in time. Frank arrived first, his pulse quickening as he noticed the drawing still taped to the walls. His gaze lingered on one particular piece. The sound of footsteps from the entryway made him turn. There she was, Kathy, older, wiser, but with the same gentle eyes he remembered. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "I cited your arguments in every case of discrimination," Frank finally said, breaking the silence. "Did you hope I'd notice someday?" "I did notice," Kathy replied softly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I was afraid to admit it." She approached the old easel, where an unfinished sketch waited, as if frozen in expectation for this very moment. "Do you remember when you taught me to say ti amo in Italian?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. From the doorway, Jack watched, leaning on his cane, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. Outside, Victoria and Rosa stood in the garden, their smiles reflecting the quiet joy of witnessing two lives finding their way back to one another. "Every word I wrote," Frank continued, "came from a place you inspired in me. Every time I defended someone who was different, it was your courage, your insight, your ability to look beyond appearances that guided me." Between laughter and tears, they reminisce about those days in the library, their shared dreams, victories and defeats. Love, like the art that once united them, had remained untouched, waiting for the perfect moment to blossom again. A year later. The garden of the old orphanage had been transformed into a beautiful venue for Kathy and Frank's wedding. Jack Holmes, seated in his wheelchair but beaming with pride, waited patiently to walk his daughter down the aisle, well as far as his strength allowed. Years of illness had taken a toll on his body. Yet his eyes sparkled with a joy that words could hardly capture. During the ceremony, Kathy took everyone by surprise with a heartfelt announcement: the establishment of the Jack Holmes Foundation, dedicated to championing the rights of children with special needs. "My father taught me that being different doesn't make you lesser," Kathy said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Now, I want other children to have the same opportunities that he gave me." Victoria, who would lead the foundation's legal efforts, approached Jack afterward and whispered, "You changed my life when I needed it most. Now I understand why Kathy is so extraordinary." She had the best teacher. Months later, as Kathy shared her baby's first ultrasound with her father, Jack smiled with contentment. "You know something?" he said weakly. "True love doesn't see differences, it only sees potential. You taught me that." Those were his final words. He passed away peacefully, knowing his daughter had not only achieved her dreams but also discovered her life's purpose: to be a voice for those society often overlooks, where it all began. At the new orphanage Kathy founded, a vibrant mural graced the wall. It depicted a young girl with Down syndrome holding hands with her African-American father, surrounded by brilliant colors. Beneath it, a simple yet profound inscription read, "Our differences don't make us less, they make us unique." In her office at the courthouse, Kathy still keeps an old rag doll, a reminder that dreams, no matter whose they are, can come true. And so, we come to the end of today's heartfelt story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It truly means the world to us. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every day, we read your beautiful messages, and they are the greatest reward for the effort we put into bringing these narratives to life. Knowing we can be a source of inspiration and reflection for you is what drives us. Thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Until next time, blessings to you all.